Sorry, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just get started here. Yeah, I know a little. Thank you very much. Yeah, if I could have everyone's attention, we'll get started with our side event today. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this side event entitled Prioritizing the Rights of Older Persons for Decent Work, Productive Employment, and Full Participation in Society. So my name is Katrina Buzanis. I'm a Senior Manager of Policy and Advocacy at the International Federation on Aging. So I'd like to extend a warm thank you to everyone attending today's session, to the distinguished experts that we have speaking on the panel today, and the organizers that have supported the delivery of today's event, including the NGO Committee on Aging, the Group of Friends of Older Persons in New York, UN DESA, along with support from the UN Regional Commissions. So it is a pleasure for us all to join today on the occasion of the 61st Commission for Social Development, in which the priority theme calls for the creation of full and productive employment and decent work for all to reduce inequalities and advance recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So this theme arises following the devastating effects of a pandemic that shed light on the disadvantages and inequities that older persons face in society. In fact, it only exacerbated many of these inequities and illuminated that ageism and barriers to full inclusion in society exist and persist for older persons across the globe, across disciplines, and across environments. Regarding decent work and productivity, which is the topic of today's side event, older persons are excluded from labor markets and formal work settings due to a variety of factors, which we'll dive a little bit deeper in today. And as a result, many older persons are at risk of being unable to meet the most basic of needs, not to mention are deprived of the right to work and the value and fulfillment which comes as a result of that. We are currently in the midst of many global agendas which seek to better the lives of older persons. So the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, the Sustainable Development Goals. However, multiple challenges persist. And there is work to be done to achieve the objectives set out in these global agendas. So today's session aims to highlight the specific barriers faced by older persons in accessing full and productive employment and adequate social protection. We will call for strengthening the protection of the rights of older persons, which is required to meet the objectives of MIPA and the SDGs. So to outline today's session, we will have some introductory remarks and some presentations which will help to set the scene, and then followed by a response from the United Nations Regional Commissions and a question and answer period of discussion. So I understand that Mr. Daniel Zavala-Porras is running a little bit late, so instead I'm going to move on to the next speaker in our agenda. So I would like to introduce Mr. Marta Roig, Miss Marta Roig, Chief of Emerging Issues and Trends in Development at UN DESA, to set the scene and speak about the World Social Report 2023, Leaving No One Behind in an Aging World. So Ms. Roig, I will hand the floor over to you.
Yes, thanks very much, Katrina, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. As Katrina said, what I'm going to present are some key findings of the World Social Report 2023, Leaving No One Behind in an Aging World, which was launched a couple of weeks ago. In the report, we place a strong focus on employment, first of all, and on inequality, bearing in mind that we live in an aging world, we live in a world in which we are benefiting from growing longevity, but we also live in a very unequal world. So our premise in the report is that in order to make good on the promise or the aspiration of building a society for all ages, we need to put equity at the center of policy action. And employment obviously is central to this pursuit. So I'm just going to, I think I have only 5 minutes and a half probably, so I'm going to just introduce the key themes of the report. The first one focuses on older persons specifically. Policy-wise, older persons are often approached as a uniform group, and indeed we older persons face common social barriers that limit autonomy and increase the risk of exclusion. Key among them is discrimination and bias. But at the same time, older persons are a very unequal and diverse group. And it's important to understand this diversity in order to act effectively. I'm going to just illustrate what I mean by diversity with the example of poverty. So the question of how many older persons live in poverty, we do not have a clear answer for this basic question. There are few cross-country estimates of income poverty specifically on old age poverty, and the estimates that are available are inconclusive at best and sometimes contradictory. The reason for that is that the data that are necessary to estimate poverty by age are not available in many countries. But what the few estimates available agree on is that women, older women, suffer disproportionately from poverty, more than any other age group in society. Here I'll show quickly our own estimates of, in this case, relative poverty by age and sex. You will see that both in developed and in developing countries, women shown in the yellow bars, they are yellow here, have high levels of poverty than men at all ages, but especially in old age, meaning 65 and over, shown at the right of both graphs. In developed countries, for example, high levels of poverty among older persons are due entirely to high levels of poverty among older women. And the reasons for that are to be found, in the disadvantages that women experience even before they reach old age through their lifetimes. In the labor market, lower labor market participation, lower wages, shorter working careers because women bear the brunt of deficiencies in caregiving, and so on. And so that leads me to the second key theme of the report, which is the importance of taking a life course approach to aging. Focusing on older persons is not enough if we want to ensure that we are in good health and able to take care of ourselves and live in economic security once we reach old age. We have to start at birth. We have to start by giving equal opportunities through access to quality education, lifelong learning, health from the time when we are born, and especially investing in the institutions of work. And in particular, trying to address the challenging problem of informal employment, trying to reach workers in informal employment, and also providing opportunities to, in the long term, promote transitions from informal employment to formal employment, and also addressing the expanding tide of precarious employment. So all these measures will help make sure that when we reach old age are in as good shape and able to take care of themselves as possible, but will also ease concerns about fiscal pressures, the issue of fiscal sustainability, which in many countries in the policy discourse on aging is what seems to matter the most. The fiscal sustainability of pension costs and healthcare costs. We argue in the report that in countries that do not have comprehensive social protection systems, the focus needs to be on expanding access to pensions and to social protection systems in general, and ensuring that benefits are adequate. In rich countries, in countries with comprehensive social protection systems, we warn of the effect that reforms to address fiscal cost or concerns over fiscal cost can have on the economic security of many older persons, especially if these reforms affect the redistributive effect that pensions have. One of these reforms is increasing the age at retirement, which is mostly done for all workers in the same way. We also recommend strategies to expand working. We say that older persons workers should be able to continue working in old age if they wish to do so, and should have access to formal employment in that case, but should not have to do so. And we recommend strategies that, and this will be discussed by other panelists, I suppose, to expand opportunities for decent work among older workers and to eliminate the barriers they face to access the labor market. Here I was just yesterday reading in the New York Times the result of a survey done in France, I think, where there's a plan to increase retirement age shortly, in which I think it's more than half of employers, 5 or 6 for every 10 employers, said that they would not and they were not planning to hire any workers above the age of 50. So there's an issue, obviously, of ageism that needs to be addressed, and there are many more barriers that older workers face in accessing to the labor market. And probably I'm at the 6 minutes, and I just want to introduce the third theme, which is that what we recommend is fiscal sustainability with equity. A sole approach on fiscal sustainability runs the risk of increasing inequality. And fiscal sustainability with equity will be increasingly important as young people and people in working age today reach older ages. Often, the implication forecasts on population aging are based only on total population numbers. But the composition of the population is changing as well as young cohorts reach old age. Obviously, barring a major catastrophe, future generations of older persons will be more educated than today's and therefore can be more productive. They will be healthier than today's, but they will also be more unequal, and in some cases, more economically insecure. So all these trends need to be taken into account. And I'll stop here. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. So next we'll move on to setting the scene. I'll hand things over to Mr. Mathieu Cognac, Senior Multilateral Cooperation Specialist at the International Labour Organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katrina, for the warm welcome, and it's very nice to be here with all of you. And I will try to just take a few minutes to set the scene, and for that I will hopefully not repeat, but reinforce some of the key messages that our colleague from DESA has presented so well just now. And of course, we're here in this Commission for Social Development, which this year focuses on the issue of employment, decent work for all. And here I'd like to emphasize the word for all, because it means for all. It means also for older persons. And it is true that despite so much of the progress that has been done since 2002, since MIPA, Madrid, still, when I say there, I mean older persons still tend to suffer quite acutely from discrimination, unequal opportunities in the world of work. And I think we have just heard that from the surveys that you've mentioned. And of course, countries are not all dealing with it in the same way. They are all affected very differently by this demographic transition. Most industrialized countries face aging and shrinking populations, and most developing countries are confronted with growing populations, a youth bulge, and rapid aging. And global trends translate into a growing labor force, a larger share of older workers in labor force, and increased dependency ratios. So maybe to help us set the scene a bit better, let's just go over a few statistics, a few data on population dynamics, if you will. First, in light of increasing life expectancy, progress of medicine, and so on, declining fertility, the world's population is expected to reach about 9 billion by 2050. Also, a person that is born today in Europe has about a 50% chance of turning 100 years old. Longevity has actually doubled since 1900. It's the fastest change ever. And the old age population, 65 and over, will grow by over 300% over the course of this century by comparison to the working age population, those between 15 and 65 years old, which will grow less, but still will grow by around 70%. Population aging is happening much more quickly than in the past. In France, to use example again, it took about 150 years to move from a share of older people of 10% to a share of 20%. But for countries like Brazil, China, India, it will take less than 20 years. So older persons, and that's important to remind ourselves, older persons are also quite often older workers. And so in that sense, we should be reminded of a few facts that concern older persons at work or older workers. And also demystify a few, I would say, misperceptions that exist out there. For example, only 28% of startups by younger people will last longer than 3 years, according to statistics. But for seniors, those 50 and over, the success rate is 70%. Older workers do not take more sick leave days than younger workers. Older workers are also just as successful in upskilling as younger workers, as long as they never interrupt their learning paths. And here we heard more about the lifelong learning patterns. And productivity levels of older workers are often the same as those of young people. Now, I was mentioning the differences in regions and countries. Countries at different stages of development, of course, have very different needs when it comes to aging. So many aging, developing societies do not have adequate pension systems in place, and therefore they have very high labor force participation rates for older persons, for older people. And at the same time, aging developed economies often have found ways to include older workers into the labor force. Another point is that labor market conditions determine the specific nature of the challenges that are linked to aging. So, for instance, the very high degree of informality is a key challenge in Latin America. I'm sure a colleague from ECLAC will confirm. In European countries, the struggle is more with high levels of inactivity among the older workers. It's not the case in Africa, for example. And in Asia, inadequate pension levels often lead to higher rates of old age poverty. So it's important to clarify those misperceptions, misconceptions, also those that regard somehow, somewhere, an intergenerational competition in the labor market between the young and the not so young workers. Because, for one, there is no clear correlation between the labor force participation rates of the older people and of the younger people. Actually, in fact, in some countries, in Germany, for example, both rates have increased over time. And as a matter of fact, countries with increase in labor force participation rates for older persons and for younger persons tend to have lowest or among the lowest unemployment rates. So now let's turn to old age dependency ratios. And let's turn to them also because they are about to change. So in Japan, for example, in 1980, there were 15 people 65 and over who depended on 100 people at the working age. In 2015, those 15 people were 45 people. And in 2050, we are looking at about 80 people who will be depending on 100 people at working age. So that's, of course, a very drastic increase. However, the dependency ratios are a very crude indicator because they do not take into account the fact that not all people at working age are actually working. And so we have to take all of this with a grain of salt. Another source of concern is, and it was mentioned by our colleague from DESA, is the rise in working poverty among the elderly, particularly for older women. Even in rich economies, unfortunately, many older people do transition from work to poverty. And in 2018, about 20%, about a fifth of women aged 75 years or more in the European Union were at risk of poverty. When they lose their jobs at an older age, many older people do not move into unemployment, but rather they often move into inactivity. And often it's because they have no job to go to. They have increased difficulties of finding another job. So this, I think, leads all of us to a difficult topic, which is the question of pension reforms. And again, it was alluded to. Because, of course, today's society is not the same that we had back in 1945 when the UN was created, when we studied when we were young and we worked when we were adults and we retired when we were older. Things have changed. Lifelong learning, new ways of working have made a definite dent into this, and the reality is different. And therefore, aging societies are faced with an increase in social spending compared to tax revenues. But what we need to remember is that such an imbalance actually does not have to be the result of aging societies. If policies are in place that allow people to work longer if they want to, and that increase labor force participation rates among and across all age groups. Therefore, when we implement pension reforms, such as it was mentioned, raising the retirement age, governments need to consider the circumstances faced by different groups of workers, and perhaps by creating more flexible, more phased, or sometimes partial retirement policies with guaranteed universal minimum benefits. It's probably with this right combination of policies and with the commitment, the willingness and action of relevant stakeholders, demographic transitions not only become more manageable and sustainable, but they can also turn into opportunities. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that broke down a lot of misconceptions as well, and really nicely set the scene for some of the conversations that we're going to have for the remainder of the side event. So I will also now go to Mr. Daniel Zavala-Porras, who's just walked in, of the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations and Vice Chair of the 61st Session, to provide some remarks.
Thank you so much, and please, sincere apologies for being late. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak here in my capacity as Vice Chair of the Commission on Social Development in this session, 61st. But also I would like to use this opportunity, if I may, to share a bit of the experience of my country, of Costa Rica, particularly with respect to the issue in question here, which is the rights of older people, prioritizing their rights, and particularly among these rights, the right to work, right? And the responsibility of governments to provide the opportunities for everyone for full employment and of course, decent work. I would like to say in the first place that we understand and we cannot highlight enough the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the rights of older persons. It is a human rights crisis that, besides the suffering and the loss during the pandemic, which still continues particularly in many countries who have been affected by the inequities in the access to vaccines, it is this multidimensional impacts on human rights that our countries have to deal with. And so Costa Rica, for those who may not know, is within the Latin American Caribbean region, which is already an aging overall region. Costa Rica is amongst the most advanced in this process in terms of population aging, where the share of older populations, which is around 10% today, is expected to grow by until 20% by 2045. My country is also one where life expectancy at birth has reached 80.3 years old for both sexes. So the pressure that this demographic trend is having not only on the current challenges but also a future challenge is quite important. And so It is expected that in Costa Rica, the share of people between 0 to 15 years old will equal the share of people older than 60 years old by 2027. And this is particularly relevant to Costa Rica, but if you look at the figures, Latin American countries are in similar positions, sometimes even more advanced. But this brings us again the issue of the importance of having these spaces and continuing these conversations in a time where the agenda of youth, for example, in the UN is becoming increasingly important. So we absolutely support that, but we have to say as well that the trends and the data we have in our before us tells us that we also need to have this perspective of life course approach and looking particularly of the situation of older persons. So Costa Rica has dedicated numerous efforts to address well-being and advancement of older persons, beginning with the first comprehensive law we had in 1999. This was even before MIPA, but it certainly set some of the standards that we have been strengthening since, including the creation of a specific mechanism, a national mechanism, to deal with policies regarding older persons. That is the National Council for Older Persons, which is presided by our head of state. And so the situation of older persons in work is the following. 59% of older persons are employers or workers that are self-employed, that is independent workers. 26% of them live in their own and work from their own residence. And 23% participate in industrial activities and 13% in agricultural course. So this set of characteristics for older persons imply a greater degree of and risk of precariousness in their work, given the fewer qualifications that their jobs are require. And so with that in mind, what the government launched in the aftermath of the pandemic was a series of initiatives. First, to do not leave older persons alone during the pandemic, that is providing resources of income to families and persons, including older persons. We also launched an initiative called Let's Get Inspired by Optimism, which was campaigns meant to address and to engage with older persons to face issues regarding loneliness, particularly older persons who were affected by lockdowns, so addressing the issues of loneliness and mental health issues of older persons. And of course, even now, after the pandemic, the national program to support micro enterprises, social mobility, has been providing campaigns of self-employment and supporting with credits and non-refundable business development service older persons. So we have done our job in terms of trying to maintain some coherence in social policies despite the affectation by the pandemic. But let me go now into what are the challenges. Definitely we face a great challenge in terms of sustainability of our social security systems. There is pressure going on, especially because a lot of older persons, a big share, it depends on the income that is provided directly by the state. And so with an aging population, we are facing this problem of sustainability. When our younger population will get older, who would pay for these contributions by the state to the income of older persons? This is something we need to rethink. The second challenge we are dealing with is the issue of care. The government passed a bill in 2022, actually last year, to deploy and strengthen the system of care. because a big share of older population is under the issue of dependency, and so dealing with the care not only with older persons but with people throughout the ages is a big challenge for Costa Rica at this stage, and also developing the strategy of healthy aging. And the third one is digital inclusion. We have as a data that only 38% of older adult women and 41.3% of adult men, older men, have access to the internet. That means that a big proportion of our older people are still face inaccessibility of digital technologies, and this poses a great challenge also to digital inclusion in the context of work. So these three challenges that I wanted to highlight just tell us that the need to discuss these things at the global level, because these are issues that are connected with how the international community can support through financing, through defining standards together. And again, we see the need to advance towards a legally binding instrument. From the experience of Costa Rica, what we see is that the Inter-American Convention, which is our legally binding instrument at the regional level, made us advance a big stride, a big step in terms of recognizing and ensuring human rights. But in the face of these three challenges, among others that I have highlighted, makes us believe that there is a need to advance in that regard. And hopefully this discussion, together with the good company and good expertise of the panelists here, will make us also advance the discussion and try to make countries come to the same table and discuss collectively how we can advance more effectively these rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing a little bit about the specific challenges of Costa Rica, which is fascinating to hear and will greatly lead into our discussion. So next I will hand over the reins to our moderator for the remainder of the session, Dr. Alexander Sidorenko, Senior Advisor of European Center for Social Welfare Policy and Research.
Thank you, Katerina. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. The scene is set by excellent interventions of Marta, Mathieu, and Danielle. So now we would try to look into the issues which have been already raised through the regional lenses. I will now invite, in alphabetical disorder, of representatives of regional commissions, but I intend to start with Lisa Wars. Lisa is Chief of the Population Unit in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the largest geographically region of the world. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And before I start, just a very warm thank you to the organizers for organizing this event, focusing on older persons and linking that to the priority theme of the 61st session of the Commission for Social Development, which is prioritizing the right of older persons for decent work and productive employment and full participation. And linking back to what Matthew said about the situation in the European, North American region that I'm speaking about today, is that we actually, yes, we need to talk about the right of older persons to work, but it's also very clear in the face of population aging that we need older persons to work. And there are challenges, tensions around that. Because on the one hand, I would say from what we see in the region, governments are totally behind this, trying to get improve employment participation of older workers. But then when you increase the pension ages for those sustainability challenges that we heard about earlier, but ageism in the labor market prevails, there is a gap between the requirement to work longer until you qualify for your pension and your opportunities in the job markets. So on the one hand, we need older people's employment. On the other hand, we have these barriers. And it might be useful to think about sort of the different entry points to tackle those barriers, which are on the one hand older persons or older workers themselves. So what might constrain them from working? One aspect is, of course, not getting access to jobs, because the economic situation at a given time in a given country might mean that there's simply not enough jobs for everyone. And then if you're older, in the situation of ageism, you're not as competitive as younger people. But it might also be that you have health issues, and that you might actually not physically physically be able to perform the jobs in the way they are required or offered. Or it might be that you care for people with health issues in the later stages of working life. It might be your spouse, it might be your parents, or you might even have care responsibilities for grandchildren. And so your constraints might not be just linked to lack of jobs or lack of openness for you to work, but it might actually be that you have constraints that are not compatible with the current world of work. And so an important aspect here, and that is something that countries in the ECE region are working on, is to create more age-friendly work environments through measures such as entitlements to flexible working or part-time working or care-related leaves that allow you to do both work and care. Because we know also, and that goes with population aging, that we have a challenge of long-term care provision. And we know that the majority of that care is provided by family members, and informal carers, the majority of whom are women. And as we increase retirement ages to adapt to population aging and longevity, we hit that period where the care responsibilities of older workers hit in. They might before have been retired at that age, but if they are required to work longer, then that becomes a challenge. So it's about creating a service infrastructure of services that allow you to work, or flexible working time. And here it's also, of course, an important part to think about when you have to take time off because you have a health issue, or you have a terminally ill parent or spouse that you want to take some time off. It's just not possible to work during that period. It's important then to bring people back into the labor market through rehabilitation or reintegration schemes. And that is something that is also increasingly discussed or implemented, because that inactivity that Matthew was mentioning, that people at a certain age then simply get sort of, don't manage to transit back in, or might not feel worth it, their own effort to try and do that, because it's sometimes demoralizing once you're out of the labor market to find your way back in. These support measures are very important to ease the transition back into the labor market to enable a longer working life. And then, so that's about older workers and their situation and constraints. Now, the other sort of entry point is through employers, because employers, of course, have a very important role to play in the labor market, and in either easing entry to jobs or retaining older workers, or following through the life or the work trajectory of workers in employment. And here a lot of emphasis has to be placed on changing attitudes. We heard this before, negative attitudes or myths about older workers' productivity, or whether whether it's worth giving access to trainings, because it might not really give the returns if there's only a few years left before retirement, etc. We know about all of these things, but it's very important basically to work with employers to change these attitudes, to see the value of the contributions of older people, and to create workplaces that are fully aware of the evolving needs across the life course, whether it be with regard to training, with regard to flexibility, care responsibilities, etc. And then, of course, the state needs to develop labor strategy, employment strategies, incentives that enable, we heard earlier the idea of flexible retirement schemes that enable older people, older workers to stay attached to the labor market, maybe reduce their working time to part-time, and have retirement schemes that allow that flexibility. And that is increasingly done. Because we also have, of course, people's attitudes. They might no longer want to work. And they might want to retire. In my region, that is possible for many because pension coverage is good. So we also need to encourage older workers to stay and make it easy and make it interesting for them to remain in the labor market longer. I think I stop here, and I'm happy to come back for further discussion.
Thank you, DESA. Perfectly on time. As I promised to be disordered in alphabetical order, I would like now to turn to cross Mediterranean and come to Arab countries. And I would like to invite Sarah Salman, Population Affairs Officer of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, to intervene. Sarah.
Thank you, Sasha, and hello everyone. What I'm going to try to do in the next few minutes is to talk about older persons today and then the projection for the older persons in the future. And try to think with you about how can we fix the situation, the dire situation in our region. Quick figures. So in my region, currently in the Arab region, we have around 21 million older persons. Okay, not that big of a number, manageable. But what are we looking at? 62% of them do not receive a pension, so high income insecurity. We don't really have regionalized data on how many older persons continue to work. We have anecdotal evidence in some countries, and we have some statistics in others. For example, in Egypt, we have around 1 million older persons that continue to work today. The reasons for those are many. Some choose to, some are forced to, because of the economic situation and the lack of income insecurity. The pension schemes, as I said, continue to be very non-inclusive. And in most countries, they only cover the public sector. So those in the private sector, even in the formalized private sector, find themselves without social protection coverage. The labor laws in many of those countries actually only protect people until retirement age. So any older person who continues to choose or is forced to continue to work is outside the protection of a labor law and is at risk of abuse. And that is actually from anecdotal evidence is quite rampant. Ageism at the workplace, it's something common, I would say, across the regions, but in our region as well, especially because of the digital divide. So older persons are seen as relics of the past. They are unable to keep with, the very fast pace of technology. Honestly, I'm 41 and I'm already feeling dinosaurish compared to the 22-year-olds that join us and that are like wizards with those machines that they use. The opportunities for lifelong learning is still very nascent. We have some token, in some governments, some token programs that, we give ourselves a pat on the back and we're saying, oh, we're trying to do this and that and here and there. But realistically speaking, to what extent is this institutionalized? Very little. Also, even in the culture of volunteering, so as a means of continued inclusion, perhaps, even if not formally in the employment service, is also very limited. So all of this basically creates very difficult situation, I would say, for older persons that choose or are forced to continue to work in our region. And the sad part is a lot of the times the actual contribution of older persons is overlooked. So we've done, those intergenerational studies, anecdotal evidence, etc., where we find that a large group of older persons continue to be the heads of their households. Their kids live with them. Their pensions go to support their children or grandchildren. The person who actually works for my family is someone who is supporting not her children, her grandchildren. She's putting them through school. She is 70. So that kind of contribution, let alone, financial, let alone the in-kind, taking care of the grandchildren and all of the other care provision that is done, all of that is ignored. And then we just bring that down to, oh, the dependency rate of older persons is going up. No. This is a statistic, but this is not the reality. So this is a little bit of the situation today. If I'm going to take you in a short time travel trip, 30 years from now, what are we looking at? We are looking at tripling the number of older persons. So we're talking about around 70 million older persons in the region. Those 70 million in the future are currently in the working age. What's my number? So I don't give you wrong numbers. Okay, 62% of the population today is working age, right? However, what is our unemployment rate? One of the highest in the world, 12.5. Youth unemployment rate, 26%. If we're looking at female youth unemployment, 40%. So that's telling us that 30 years from now, when all these people are going to be retired, we're in trouble. I'm just going to keep giving you some numbers just to maybe making it a bit more interesting. We are thinking of the employment in the informal sector currently, 64%. Most of those that are in the informal sector are not covered by one scheme or another. So again, the situation doesn't get much better than this. So of course we have, I don't mean to be too dramatic, we have some countries that are trying to make things better, trying to adopt policies to improve the situation. But really, the urgency cannot be stressed enough. That if we want to improve the lives of older persons today, and in all honesty, I don't know to what extent is the efficiency of trying to improve employment conditions today for older persons. By the time we start acting, I don't know. But at least if we are thinking of a life course approach in our region, then we're thinking of those that will be myself. I'll be, an older person in another 20 years. So I think that is where maybe the opportunity lies, the efficiency lies. And of course, there are some measures that can be taken today, such as improving, the age-friendly work environments, try to break the stereotypes of older persons and what they can bring to the table. These are maybe some of the issues I wanted to bring to the table. I don't want to take too much time, Sasha. But I maybe want to end with a question. It seems intuitive. We're around the table, we speak the same discourse. We've been speaking this for over, several years, for some of us several decades. But things don't seem to be changing, or at least not changing fast enough. So what is it? What is it that has not, I can't speak about my region, we're relatively young, but in a region like Europe, where the population is aging pretty fast, or in other places, why hasn't there been enough done to improve the working condition, the employment condition for older persons? I mean, these countries actually need their older persons to continue to work. In my region, countries are telling people, please retire, because we have so much youth that need an employment opportunity. So what is it that can actually maybe give that extra push to increase the work? I think that's where I want to end, Sasha, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it could be some sort of a slogan of our today's meeting, right? Why it is so slow. But we also discussed it at the high-level panel yesterday, didn't we? Thank you, Sarah. And I would like to quote another saying with my apologetic smile to Marta and to Matthew. Statistics, but not reality. That's what is very often we're dealing with. We're moving now to the neighboring region, and I would like to invite Srinivas Tata. He's Director of Social Development Division, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Srinivas.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I think we've got such illustrious speakers before who have been so comprehensive that maybe I'll focus on issues which are pertinent to the region, which I think have not been touched upon. I would like to agree with a lot of the facts that have been presented and a lot of the solutions that have been offered. And the challenges are quite common across the regions. But I'd like to focus, in Asia Pacific, you'll find, if you look at the labor force participation of older persons, you'll find them high, like Matho indicated. But that's not our choice. They're working because they have no other go. They have no social protection. There's no income security. And perhaps also they have to pay for health care. So that means they have to work as long as they can. Now, therefore, I think the solution first, the overarching solution is the older persons who already reached there without being able to contribute, we have to find non-contributory. And a lot of countries have also started non-contributory pension systems. They're not exactly adequate. Sometimes it's a pittance, but they're slowly going up. But that's the number one priority. But we got to that two-pronged strategy. I think when we talk about a life course approach, when I presented facts today about the number of workers who are actually contributing, workers in the 15 to 64 age group who are actually contributing to a pension system. For Asia Pacific, even that is not significant. That means we are not preparing well. Even when this cohort of younger people become older persons, they won't have contributed. So I think we need to address the needs of those who have already become old without having been able to contribute by non-contributory systems while putting in place the life course. I think we need to do both. Sometimes I hear this as one to the exclusion of the other. I think both need to be done together. But for older persons in general who have been in the formal sector, number one, I think all of us agree that, and this came out in our regional review, that older persons need to be allowed and encouraged to work as long as they are able and willing. It's also, it's not that you just extend the age. It should be flexible. It should be up to me to work. And there are certain countries in our region who have actually managed to enforce that. For example, in Japan, the government has imposed an obligation to ensure employment up to 65 years of age, with efforts to ensure employment up to the age of 70, including through raising the flexible retirement age up to 70, abolishing mandatory retirement, and introducing a continuous employment system until 70. So there are good examples of countries which have taken steps. But obviously, the age of retirement and the desire to retire will vary depending on what kind of profession you're in. People who work for the UN, we're very happy. We go on consulting, we go on working, we apply, and we are able to work. If I'm a truck driver, construction worker, my choices may be different. Secondly, I do believe that we have to create incentives for employers, and there are real incentives for employers to hire and retain older persons. And I think, number one, I would definitely look at tax reductions, employers' credits. I think they're good examples. It's about time we started looking at those and actually make it financially viable and important and beneficial for companies to really implement these initiatives where they retain older workers over a longer time. And, they need the initiative maybe to push them along the path. And government could start with that. Then, of course, anti-discrimination law, anti-ageism law, very, very important. And above all, I think we need to talk about intergenerational planning. As older workers, we also have a duty for succession planning with people who work with us. We really need to create that capacity in terms of to set up that process of transfer of knowledge. I think that is a system that can be set up, and successful companies and really implement that very effectively. And one last point about our region, I think we need to get women into the labor force. If you really, one, it's for the viability of the labor force, and also, why are women so deprived? I mean, the fact is women never get into the labor force. They're often putting in domestic work and unpaid care work that's never accounted for. That's another point. Let's start accounting for their unpaid care to show that just because they sit at home and serve the whole family, there is a value, huge value to that. That's number one, gives them dignity, the fact that what you're putting in is valued. And we need to also get women into the labor force, into the formal labor force by providing the care support in terms of the infrastructure. Especially South Asia, it's 20-odd%. Imagine the growth of the GDP if women would join the labor force, and that would also ensure that older women are better protected when they retire. So thank you very much. These are some of the points, and I'm glad for any follow-up.
Thank you, Srinivas, particularly for saving a couple of minutes as well. You also addressed one important issue, which I believe has not been mentioned yet, the issue of intergenerational in-family transfers. That's something which also deserves attention, but perhaps there will be questions related to this issue or comments on this issue. And now we're moving across Pacific to ECLAC region. And I would like to invite Simone Ciccini, is that correct? Chief of the Latin American and Caribbean Demographic Center, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Simone.
Thank you, Sasha. And, well, we started the session with Marta presenting the DESA's report on aging. Let me also please share with you some key findings on decent work and older persons of our last report, regional report on aging in Latin America and the Caribbean, inclusion and the rights of older persons. We prepared it as a contribution to the 4th review of MIPA, and we presented it last December at our regional intergovernmental conference on aging and the rights of older persons held in Santiago, Chile, and chaired by the government of Chile. The report has an overview on the fast aging process in the region. We delve on the 3 priority areas of MIPA, on the issue of care, and with respect of the priority area on older persons and development. There we look at, employment opportunities for older persons who want to work. And there are 3 key findings. One is that the proportion of older persons in the labor market is increasing. 2, and this Srinivas highlighted, remaining in the labor market should be an option, but unfortunately, for many, it is an obligation because of lack of income and lack of pension coverage and lack of decent pensions. And 3, labor market participation by older persons is deeply affected by age discrimination and gender inequalities. On the first point, luckily we do have data in Latin America, so let me share a few points on employment for older persons. It has gone up, as I was saying, and the proportion of older persons aged 16 above, in the labor market in Latin America and the Caribbean went from 5.5% in the year 2000 to 8.3% in 2020, and it's projected to rise to 10% in 2030. So in 2030, 1 every 10 workers will be 16 above. This is the result of the aging process, because if we look at the employment rate for both sexes, is about 33% steadily. It hasn't moved much, although in 2020, because of the pandemic, all age groups were affected and many people went out of the labor force. But behind that stable 33% employment rate, there are different trends between men and women. The older male employment rate is higher than for women, but it's going down. Okay, for men, the employment rate went from 50% in 2000 to 46% in 2019. While for women aged over 60, so there was a slight increase from 19.5% in 2000 to 22.4% in 2019. This is explained by broader trends because the employment rates for women and participation rates have gone up in Latin America, and for men have gone down for all age groups. Second point, the issue that people have to continue to work, not necessarily they want to continue to work, is connected to what was mentioned by Matthew, high informality, low coverage and inadequate income from pension systems, but also by other processes that make life in old age insecure, which is the huge issue of gender inequalities and also unpaid care that was mentioned by Srinivas. Also, we have indicators like the fact that the employment rate beyond the legal retirement age is very high in the region, and that is a clear signal of how weak are the social protection system and how broad is informality. And also many older persons take self-employment as an option. There is the good part. It's flexible. You can manage when and where to work, but then it's connected very often with informality. And with respect to age and gender discrimination, there are still huge challenges for decent work. There are prejudices, stereotypes, and those deepened during the pandemic. That is something older person civil society has told us. And to promote decent work for older persons in the region, We need to design public policies that help to combat all these discriminations. Some things have happened. Brazil, Chile, and Colombia have carried out legislative reforms combating age discrimination in employment. Chile, for instance, has removed the age limit in their national training programs, promoting the right to lifelong education. Argentina, Chile, and Colombia have promoted tax incentives and subsidies to incentivize formal work for older persons. And also, there are some examples of encouragement of participation by older persons in the decisions, the policy decisions, like in Colombia with the National Council of Older Persons. In conclusion, the policy recommendations are in line with what you have heard: create formal, decent employment, quality jobs for all, so access to social protection, extending unemployment insurance, guarantee sufficient labor income and secure condition. Also, we need policies and programs to encourage the hiring of older persons, combating ageism, and also have information systems that give us the evidence to decide good policies. But one last point, let me say that we think that a multilateral, legally binding instrument would be really important on the rights of older persons to combat one of the key points, discrimination by age and gender. I think it would be really important and make a difference to older persons all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you. So our trip around the world is over, and it's time for questions. The floor is open. No questions? Yes, Erika, please.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. A couple of questions, thoughts. I mean, when Srini, you're saying we need more women to join the workforce, that's a cultural thing, isn't it? How do you know, how are you going to change the mindset of those countries that are embedded in these systems that are sort of not very equal when it comes to the roles of men and women? I'm saying this really badly, but you know what I mean. The other thing I was thinking is, I want to pick up on something Sarah said, but in general, I think the time has come. ILO did their Future of Work report, but I have to say, it didn't really talk about older persons then, like when you brought out that report. But we really have to think about new models. And yesterday or day before, I talked about the 5-generation workforce, which is very much a work of my organization, AARP. Never happened in history that we have 5 generations that are working, you know, in parallel, whatever. And we got to start thinking in that way. I mean, also, AARP is pushing for this phased retirement. We're working with private sector on their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, which covers gender and race, but we want age in there. So, you know, taking, like we were talking in some of our conversations, the whole multi-sectoral approach, take what's already there, embed aging into it. So, because if you go on a separate, like was talking about, you take something and you say, you got to now work on, you know, and they're like, oh my God, I need resources, I need this. But you have a plan in place, embed aging as well into it. That's just some thoughts. But Sarah, why do you say it's too late? Because ageism is throughout the life course. Cynthia said that in her talk a couple of times already. WHO says 1 in 2 persons is ageist. The tech sector is ageist against 30-year-olds. They think they're old. Why do you think it's too late?
Thank you. So a specific question addressed to Sarah. Sarah, would you like to respond it immediately?
And to Srinivas.
Hmm?
To Sarah and to Srinivas.
To us as well. Okay, go ahead.
It's true that certain regions we've seen, especially South Asia, it's been low. And I don't think cultural or other considerations are the only reason. This sub-region was higher at one point of time. But as incomes grew, it was found that women who were perhaps in the labor force and perhaps employed in very basic occupations then had the luxury of pulling out of the labor force. That was the explanation given by the economists. Yes, culture has an impact, but I think as incomes are going up, women are going to re-enter the labor force, perhaps at a higher level, taking more value-added jobs. And we hope to see that happening. Now, we came out with 2 reports on the care economy and on female labor force participation, one specifically for ASEAN and one for the Asia-Pacific region. We never expected the kind of response that we got, especially from ASEAN. They've actually taken it on board, issued a declaration on improving female labor force participation and kind of creating an economy where women are supported, where the unpaid care work of women is recognized, and to provide a care economy that can support the return of women to the labor force in greater numbers. This has come out in a declaration. So I'm pretty hopeful. And the ASEAN grouping is full of countries with very different cultural from different cultures and religions. So I do think the signs are encouraging. So far, I think aging, even in terms of aging, suddenly the numbers are taking root in the minds of people. I'm quite sanguine and optimistic. I didn't think we would have it. In fact, when we presented the report, we had a couple of comments. A lot of countries won't accept this. You'll find a lot of pushback. Sometimes putting it out there, you realize that you're not getting the resistance that you expected. Are we self-censoring ourselves sometimes? We expect someone to react that way. But I do think there is more receptiveness to this idea in our region. Thanks.
Thank you, Srinivas. An apology. I missed it. I'll give you the floor immediately. Sarah.
Thank you for the question. First, just on the issue of female labor force participation and the cultural challenges, because in our region we have exactly the same issue. Actually, we have the lowest in the world in terms of female labor force participation. And a lot of it is, at face value, attributed to culture. But again, in reality, the lack of or the weak infrastructure for the care economy leads to women being taken away from the labor force participation, the informality and the participation in informality, so that in a way they don't count, although they're working. So I just wanted to reiterate what Srinivas said, because this is not just in one region. Now, on the issue of why it's too late, I think I was being a little bit... I was teasing you. But no, to be honest, currently, if we are to start working today, by the time the snowball effect happens, those that will most likely reap the benefits will be those that will be older in 10 years or 15 years. For example, I'll give you an example. Looking at lifelong learning, right now some of the governments are saying, oh, we want to do illiteracy eradication among older persons. So, for example, illiteracy eradication for older persons are programs that are being implemented by multiple countries, because we have around in some countries, 2 out of 3 of older persons are illiterate. So if I'm being very pragmatic, the resources that goes into these programs versus the outcomes and the outputs from them, and how much are they able to target older persons, honestly, is limited, is narrow. But if you're working on lifelong learning for those that are today in the working age, who will be the older persons in tomorrow, the efficiency is higher. So when I said it's too late, given the dire situation that we are in today, it's unlikely that if we today reform our contributory, for example, pension plans, those that are 62 who will retire in 1 year are not going to benefit. So we will have to rely on social assistance in return. So this is just in terms of, at least in our region, putting aging and older persons in the policy priority. If we are to speak to our governments, we need to tell them that maybe today you think it's not a priority because we're a young region, but this is going to be very, very fast. This is going to be a top priority. And if you don't act today, you're going to be in trouble very quickly. So this is, I think, the message that we really want to bring across. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Simone?
But on the issue of why women are not in the labor market, adding to what my colleague said, sure, in a way it's cultural. That's the culture pushes women to be the ones who take care of children, of the elderly, of people with disability. But then we are pushing from the ECLAC public policies that can counteract that culture, because really the fact of promoting childcare, of promoting parental leave, of promoting the extended school day, they do have an impact on the possibility for younger women to get into the labor market. And also later on in life, I think Lisa mentioned, retraining programs to be able to come back if you have been out. And the pandemic showed how, we all went home, but then in Latin America, school closed, and it was the longest school closing all over the world. And women had to leave the labor force in hundreds. I mean, it was very strong, much worse than for men, because they had to take care of children who were alone at home. That was a very clear example. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Any more questions? Yes, please. Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, okay. I'm from the Turkish delegation, and before I ask my question, I want to state that this is our fourth day here, and we are very grateful all of our friends who share our sorrow for the ones who lost their lives in the earthquakes in Turkey. My question will be about, we usually see that regulations regarding age discrimination towards older persons in the labor market has been a popular agenda issue, especially in countries with comparably older populations, which has a fairly pragmatic but understandable side. So my question is, isn't it possible for all countries, all actors, to approach this issue from just an inclusive and right-based approach perspective? Like, is it caused by the lack of awareness on mainstreaming aging, or can we explain the mechanism behind by other factors? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to pick up this question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Later? No, okay. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. My name is Melvin Wajiri. I'm from Cameroon. And it's really interesting listening to the conversation. I've been following very keenly. And I have a worry, and my worry is like, I don't know if it is defined somewhere, when the older people, the time where they will stop working. Because if we are talking about decent jobs for them, including them in social work and society, when do we think it's a time where they can stop working? Because I understand that as you get older, efficiency is reduced. Sometimes you just need dignity and to count your achievements about your life, what you have done on earth, and to celebrate the achievements. I don't know if it is something that can be included in the programs so that they should also benefit from the time where they don't have nothing to work, to bother about working, but they can benefit from all social programs that will support them in terms of dignity, to dignify them as a sign, a symbol of their legacy that they have created in their existence. It worries me if we don't have programs like that, because I'm also getting older. I don't know how long I'm going to, I'm privileged to see a lot of older people here. I respect them, and I'm just praying that in the future, God bless, I should have their age. And also to look at, in terms of transfer of knowledge, I know they say you are older. If you are older, you are wiser. That's a statement we use in Africa. How do we capitalize on knowledge gain and transfer of knowledge from older people? If they have to go, how do we benefit from the knowledge And I believe that some of the older people have been very involved in their lives when they were young in contributing in development. How do we capitalize on them rather than looking them as pictures or images that maybe they're not very useful or they need support? But how do we capitalize on that knowledge gain, knowledge and transfer of knowledge? I don't know if it's answered somewhere, but don't worry. Armando maybe may not have a place here. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful question, really. Do you have some sort of an institutionalized way of transferring knowledge between generations? Question mark, if I understood you correctly, sir. Yes. And the last question we have just for one more.
I was wondering, I mean, since the World Social Report is just fresh off the press, whether in the data that you looked at, whether there was any statistical significant or kind of meaningful trend that you see that, for example, even if it's just a tiny percentage of older persons who enter the labor market basically in older age because maybe in the more demographically advanced countries, they're running out of labor. And I was also wondering, I mean, whether there is any data that you came across that indicates this, or whether any of the colleagues of the 5 regional commissions or from the ILO came across this, or is it just that age discrimination is basically winning out?
And I would misuse my position as the moderator to introduce the previous speaker, Robert Fenne, my colleague in the division. Thank you, Robert. We close the question sessions, well, the questions, and I would like to give the floor to the representatives of regional commissions to answer the questions which were set. Sarah?
Maybe quick points. In response of how do we do the knowledge transfer, an experience from our region, in Tunisia, they created the equivalent of an online database for documenting older person's skills. So an older person who's retired can go and they can document basically what skills they have and how can they benefit the other generation, so that if a firm or an organization or what have you is looking for something specific, they can go to that bank. This is another similar experience was done in Kuwait. So they are trying to match, if you want, what the older persons have to offer with what the current job market needs. So that's maybe just an idea from my region. The question on the mainstreaming that came from Turkey. I think this is going to be the next way forward for addressing aging and older persons issues. That just by thinking about, you know, a policy for older persons, a strategy for older persons or for aging is not enough. So unless we really sensitize the different, and here I'm going to talk about the government really, unless we're sensitizing the different branches or ministries or actors in the government, the labor, interior, planning, finance, social affairs, what have you, about the issues of aging and older persons, we will not really get to that comprehensive, coherent, holistic approach of ensuring the rights of older persons as the generations basically age. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. A last chance. Simone?
Very quickly to some that were very complex questions, like when do you stop working, right? You know, I think the ideal answer would be that you stop working when your own will decides, you know, you still want to work, you don't want to, it's an individual choice. But at the macro level, obviously, it looks on the, because we are also to take into account the financial situation and the demographic situation, so it depends at what stage of the demographic transition you are. You need to look at the demographic profile of the population, and then you get to a retirement age, which when you try to change it, it can be very complicated, right? Second, you need to look at the economic sectors. There are some sectors where obviously you were off much younger than other economic sectors. But I think what is really important is that when we think about the social protection systems that are universal, that we provide the correct incentives, or at least not the wrong incentives. Because if you want to continue working and you're able to, why should you go home, or why are you penalized? So it's a matter then, it's a long story, but it's a matter of how you design those social protection systems to give the right incentives. And finally, just another complex question on, are older people sustaining sectors that do not have enough labor? Well, in Latin America, we don't see that yet. Indeed, we have some labor shortages in some economic sectors in some countries, say Chile, aging fast, growing quite decently, and then economic sectors like domestic care, agriculture, services, they start having labor shortages. And they're, more than having older people working, it's migrants. And it's something new, the intra-regional migration process, and you get younger people from other countries of the region coming to Chile. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Sasha,
just wanted to pick up on, look, if you really want, that's why it's important to have figures on the unpaid work that's been put in. If you look at care work being put in for grandchildren, you'll find a lot of it being done by older persons. And agriculture, we often, our impression of older persons, we look at older persons in an organized, perhaps in an urban setting. A large part of the older persons who live now, especially in Asia Pacific, are in the rural sector. The picture of a farmer today, even in the developed countries, is that of above 60. The average age of a farmer all over the world is growing, and definitely in the developed world, it is well past 60. So if you want to look at one sector that you think is being propped up by labor from older persons, it has to be agriculture, and that's a very, very significant chunk. Thank you.
Thank you, Fenos. And Daniel?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sasha. I just wanted to make a quick comment, and after listening to the real experts, allow me to get a bit philosophical, because you trigger a bit my mind here with your question. There is no doubt that the issue of the social protection systems are being pressured right now, and discussions about raising age of retirements are current. But there are two things that I wanted to highlight here. When you look at the SDG 8, I think it's SDG 8 on decent, creating full and productive employment and decent work. I think that as we move towards an inversion of the age pyramid, where we will have more older people on the top and less people on the bottom, we would need to rethink even the word productive, because we certainly, and MIPA tells us to use the potential, to fully use the potential of older persons. But to what for? Productive, yes, but productive to the system of economic productivity, or to the well-being and welfare of people? Can we use the full potential of older persons to actually contribute to society in other ways than the economic per se, right? And the other thing is robotization. Robotization is happening right now. So there will also be losses of jobs. So how to rethink the potential that human beings can do in their societies, besides the, again, original classic economic theory. So all these things need to be rethought, but I think you shouldn't wait until the situation comes to our door. And second, there's never a piecemeal solution that is good. We need to discuss these things together. So I just wanted to again bring you back the question and perhaps thinking together. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. You did my job. I don't have that much to say at the end, and we don't have time for further discussions. I think it's been an excellent panel, excellent side event, and I would like to congratulate organizers. I would like also to thank, of course, the participants. If you forgive, I won't be naming the names. They're all sitting here. Thank you so much for a very thoughtful introduction. And at the very end, and to a less extent, I would like to thank everyone who made this event a part of their busy day. Thank you and goodbye.
Sorry.